Always somewhere in the story, which up until now we thought was ours. Whoever it was that we were being then had to wander out into the green, towering forest, reaching to the end of the world and beyond. Older than anything whoever we were being could remember. And find there that it was no different from the story anywhere in the forest. And never be able to tell, as long as the story was there, whether the fiery voices, now far ahead, now underfoot, the eyes staring from their instant that held the story as one breath, the shadows offering their spread flowers, and the chill that leapt from its own turn through the hair of the nape like a light through a forest, knew the untold story all along and were waiting at the right place as the moment arrived for whoever it was to be led at last by the wiles of ignorance through the forest and come before them face to face for the first time, recognizing them with no names and again surviving, seizing something alive to take home out of the story. But what came out of the forest was all part of the story. Whatever died on the way or was named but no longer recognizable, even what vanished out of the story, finally, day after day, was becoming the story. So that when there is no more story, that will be our story. When there is no forest, that will be our forest. There was a book that my sister actually found for me. It's called The Indians in Winter Camp. And it was a book that had wonderful watercolor paintings of Indians, woodland Indians. And below them, it was a primer book to learn to read with. And my mother had got it so to help to teach me to read in a year or so. But I was so interested by these pictures that I wanted to find out what it said about them at the bottom. So I learned how to recognize the word for man, an Indian man. Indian man does something. So little by little, I was learning to read by the fascination to find out about these people who were living in the kind of place that I had seen and where I wanted to live too. I mean, I wanted that kind of relation to the place. And I've often thought that it was very ironic to have learned to read in order to find out about people who didn't read and write. Who to have had that relation. And to have had that relation to language too, that the language was a link with a non-literate people, with a people who didn't use language in that way. All of these are things, by the way, which I haven't come to the end of. I mean, I'm still floundering around back in the beginning somewhere. My father was a minister, and it was a very sort of strict and very, in fact, repressive upbringing, and I was taught never to say no or do anything of the kind. And when I was not as tall as this table, there was this one tree in the backyard that I felt this very close and strong and clearly unspoken attachment to. And one day, these obviously telephone linemen came, and they came into the backyard, and they started sawing some limbs off the tree. And I just blew up and ran out of the back of the house and started screaming at them and beating them and saying, "You let the tree alone." And to my amazement, I mean, I hadn't any judgment in the matter. This was, simply total rage and protective rage. They backed off. I mean, they didn't know how to quite handle this outburst. Neither did my father, and I wasn't punished for it, but obviously the tree got dealt with when I wasn't around. But I do remember that as a very early manifestation of this feeling for other kinds of life. Neither my father nor my mother knew the names of the trees where I was born. "What is that?" I asked, and my father and mother did not hear. They did not look where I pointed. Surfaces of furniture held the attention of their fingers, and across the room they could watch walls they had forgotten, where there were no questions, no voices, and no shade. Were there trees where they were children, where I had not been? I asked. Were there trees in those places where my father and my mother were born? And in that time did my father and my mother see them? And when they said yes, it meant they did not remember. What were they, I asked, what were they? But both my father and my mother said they never knew. In those early years of my childhood, and incidentally, this was in Union City, New Jersey, which is up on the bluffs, on the Palisades above Hoboken, so that you look across at New York, you look across at the Manhattan skyline. But when I've gone back in recent years, it's eerily silent. You don't hear the sound of the city. You just see it over there. And I don't remember being struck by that as a child. I'm struck by it now, having lived for years in New York. But this was on New York Avenue. We lived on 4th Street, and the trolley car used to go by at night, and all sorts of things used to come into my mind at the sound of the trolley car. And one of the recurring fantasies that I remember from that time, and I can remember it sometimes when I heard the sound of the streetcar going, those iron wheels going down at night, was that this urban world, this world where the ground was covered with cement and asphalt and stones, and where there were buildings everywhere. This would cover the whole earth. There would be nothing but that. And this was a kind of nightmare. I realized how important it was to me to think that the urban world came to an end, and that the non-urban world that I'd seen, the world of woods and mountains, which I'd only seen very little of, but which had an importance to me. I mean, it was a great joy to see it, even as a very small child, that somehow that wouldn't be there anymore. There would be no chance to go there at all, and no chance to be there. That one would only be in the urban world. And I must say, this is a nightmare that I've never forgotten, obviously, and it's becoming a real menace, isn't it? You know. I don't believe we can live that way, but I think that I think there's a psychic oppression to that many people feel and don't know they're feeling it. I think that some of the urban violence probably comes just from that, from the fact that from the claustrophobia of the urban landscape. And, how it fits in, I mean, I don't have any sort of neat, glib notion of it. In fact, I'm obviously exploring it. It's one of the things that I'm trying to understand. But I think our relation with that is part of what we now are. It may have always been what we were. I think that we as a species define ourselves by our relation to the rest of life, and our vocabulary is an exclusive vocabulary. And we talk about nature as though there were nature and then man. And of course, that's not true. I mean, we're mortal just as all the rest of nature is. And we have defined ourselves at the break with the rest of life. And I think this makes for some of our terrible discomforts and some of the terrible dangers that confront us as a species. After all, we're a very recent and brief species, and that I really think that this is a problem and a quandary and a question that's as crucial as anything else that faces us. And everything else, all of our other problems are part of it. Our population explosion, our pollutions of the environment, our destruction of the environment. And I think that having broken out of narrower views of existence into seeing that this whole is something that we have to consider as a whole, I don't think we can ever go back. I don't think we can ever sort of narrow it up and say, well, we don't need to consider that anymore. And it's with us for good now. Gray whale, now that we are sending you to the end, that great God, tell him that we who follow you invented forgiveness and forgive nothing. I write as though you could understand and I could say it. One must always pretend something among the dying. When you have left the seas nodding on their stalks, empty of you, tell him that we were made on another day. The bewilderment will diminish like an echo winding along your inner mountains, unheard by us, and find its way out, leaving behind it the future, dead and ours. When you will not see again the whale calves trying the light, consider what you will find in the black garden and its court. The sea cows, the great auks, the gorillas, the irreplaceable hosts ranged countless and foreordaining as stars, our sacrifices. Join your word to theirs. Tell him that it is we who are important. I've thought a lot about how you deal with the anger that's generated by the destruction of, by the indifference to destruction and by the continuing justification of destruction, usually in the name of necessities, which one of our first necessities, of course, is greed and convenience and. How you deal with the anger is something that I don't know a great deal about. I mean, I've been trying to do it for quite a few years. I don't think you do it by trying to pretend the anger isn't there, or that it's in capitals a bad thing. It is a bad thing if you take it by itself, or if you make a virtue of it, or if you sort of abandon yourself to it. But it's a fuel. You know, it probably has its, probably the combustion of it probably leads to pollution of various kinds, but you can't run this kind of machine without it. I don't think you can deal with this destructive, violent thing without anger. I mean, I can't really believe that non-resistance to evil is the best way to deal with evil. I mean, I've tried to believe that, and I've come fairly close to it. My mother used to insist that was so. But I can always think of situations in which it seemed totally inappropriate. That sometimes the only possible answer. I mean, if someone is tormenting a child, you don't stop to persuade them that this is not a very good thing to do. I mean, you stop them, however it can be done. I've talked with Peter Matheson about this, and Peter's also had to deal with this feeling of anger. And I don't know. I think you just try to be as honest with yourself about it as possible, and not give way to it. I mean, because if the anger takes over, what you have is a shrill and hysterical and one-sided tone that doesn't see the whole picture either. Because it never comes out. Anger never. I mean, destruction and violence, I don't think ever come out very pure. This is not an original idea of mine. It comes out of a remarkable book of Kierkegaard's, which I also feel indebted to, called Purity of Heart Means to Will One Thing. And Kierkegaard comes to the conclusion that the only thing you can will totally is good. Every form of everything else, you're divided about. You have division about, and I think I buy that. I think that Kierkegaard was true, was right about that. I'm looking at trees. They may be one of the things I will miss most from the earth. Though many of the ones that I have seen already I cannot remember. And though I seldom embrace the ones I see, and have never been able to speak with one, I listen to them tenderly. Their names have never touched them. They have stood round my sleep, and when it was forbidden to climb them, they have carried me in their branches. Thoreau's been an important figure, an important writer, and an important presence and companion for many years. I find him, as I think many people do, you can see that he must have been a crusty and irritating, and sometimes you must have been very cross with Thoreau. And you can see that he's got all the New England priggishness and all of these other things, and he mustn't have been very easygoing or a very cozy companion or friend. Remember, Emerson said, "I would as soon have taken an elm by the arm," and he said about Thoreau. But there's the again and again I've had the feeling of reading something of Thoreau and said, yeah, that's the feeling of great recognition, of gratitude for his having put into words of such finality and perception something that seems utterly, absolutely true, and very, very important, and that nobody else had noticed. I mean, he does it again and again and again, to me. And of course, Walden was the book that I read first. And then in the days of when I began to become an activist in the 50s, things like civil disobedience seemed to me, and slavery in Massachusetts and the John Brown essay, which people don't seem to read very much at the moment. They read civil disobedience, but not those other two, which they're wonderful, and the passion in them, the thing. One of the things that I love about him, that aspect of Thoreau, is that he could be passionate in a not organized way. I mean, he's not part of some kind of group. This is the way I, Henry David Thoreau, feel about this. He said, and when I could not sleep, I kept a pencil under my pillow and wrote in the dark. I mean, this is in the days of John Brown. Well, this is not your ideal committee person. You know, this is Henry David Thoreau upset about slavery and the compromises that are being made about something about which there should be no compromises at all. Uncompromising man, and I think that he's a sort of cranky, irascible, but wonderful. And there's absolutely nobody like him. But I think that Thoreau was not advocating everybody going out and building themselves a little cottage in the woods and living there. If that was what they were, that was what they should do. But he says somewhere, and I misquote it, but he said, what I demand of every person is a plain and true account of their own lives, which means not just the factual details, but who they are. And I think that sentence, in wildness is the preservation of the world, also gets interpreted in far too one-sided a way, as though in making sure that Yosemite is or that the national parks are treated properly, somehow this makes sure that everything else is going to be all right. That's part of it, but I think the other end of it is the wildness in our own natures. Is the thing that we have to treat with the kind of respect that may be our salvation, and I don't mean running around the streets and being violent and irresponsible. I mean the wildness which is the unknown. I mean of the thing that we realize we don't control, and the sense of humility toward the whole part of our lives that we don't control and we don't know. That's the wildness. It's the sense that we all have that we just missed something. You know, that it just got away from us again. You know, which the moment you look at anything, it's right there. The wildness is right there. The fact that you don't have it, it's got away from you again. I think that's the wildness. It's the preservation, the acknowledgement that this is so, that you don't have it. What is wildness? Wildness is the aspect and the aspects of experience and of existence that we know we don't control. I think one of our terrible problems, psychic problems as a species now, is this sense that we really can and must control existence itself, our own existence, and everything that's part of it. With our rational minds, we know this isn't possible, but we're not very rational, however we define ourselves. I think one of the things that Thoreau is saying, or this is what he's saying to me, is in wildness, in our acceptance and our welcoming and embrace and joy in what we do not control and never will control, is our salvation. As long as we feel that we can control things, as long as we really have that terrible delusion, we're going to feel that our relation with the rest of life is one of conquest and acquisition. And this is not only killing the rest of life, it's killing us. I mean, not as a consequence, but as the same act. I mean, a Christian friend of mine once, when we were on a demonstration, started talking about Jesus saying, you know, put up your sword, for they who live by the sword shall die by the sword. And this was Barbara Deming, and she said, the idea is not that, you know, if you live by the sword, sooner or later somebody kills you. The idea is that as you draw the sword, you die by the sword. There's a part of you that's dying by acquiescing in the violent part of your nature. I think the same kind of thing happens here. That as long as you live by the idea that your relation with life as a whole is one of conquest and acquisition, you're destroying yourself. You're also destroying the physical world that sustains you. That's the most obvious ecological way of seeing it. But there's a relation with the rest of life that is not just a practical and rational one of oh, we better save the rainforest because we can get medicine out of them. We better save the rainforest because we're not complete if we destroy them.
Papa. Koa Ikea. Ali Haku.
Finally, the old man is telling the forgotten names and the names of the stones they came from. For a long time I asked him the names, and when he says them at last, I hear no meaning and cannot remember the sounds. I have lived without knowing the names for the water from one rock and the water from another, and behind the names that I do not have, the color of water flows all day and all night. The old man tells me the name for it, and as he says it, I forget it. There are names for the water between here and there, between places now gone except in the porcelain faces on the tombstones and places still here. And I ask him again the name for the color of water, wanting to be able to say it as though I had known it all my life without giving it a thought. Culture, as that word meant anything up until the Industrial Revolution, when we're talking about it, had to do with place. And it had to do with a language and a way of relating to that place, being in that place, sometimes abusing it, but living in that place that was unique to that place. And Hawaiian, after all, the Hawaiian language, there are 14 or 15 words in Hawaiian for the wind on the other side of the mountain of Haleakala. There's the wind that blows in a particular time of the month at a certain hour of the morning that blows down the mountain. There, just as you know, there are how many words in the Eskimo languages for snow? I mean, there are many, many words. These are place-specific words. These are a way of describing that exact place. The difference between the Welsh language and English, I'm told, in Wales is exactly that. I mean, that's one of the differences, that the Welsh language is specific to that place and the English language is not. That we see that here, but the language is a way of looking at the culture, saying that that culture was evolved out of a relation to that place, out of living in a way in which that the place and the life in the place were not separable. You couldn't take them apart. And of course, when you destroy the place, when you treat the place as as a bit of Kleenex, you destroy all of that, and you replace it with something much more abstract. We don't have words for those winds on Haleakala. We don't feel that we need them either. You know, you drive from here to Hana, there are the famous number of bridges going out to Hana. There are 50-some water courses going down the coast as you go out. And each one of those has a Hawaiian name and a Hawaiian history and Hawaiian legends. And a friend of ours who died 2 years ago, Harry Mitchell, wrote a wonderful, eloquent history of the coast in Hawaii, and in terms of the different watercourses. I mean, he told the history of each. He said, if you're driving, if you're walking from Maliko to or here, Keali Inui to Hana, these are the water courses. The Kahawai is the name for them, and he'd tell the story, how it got its name, where the name came from, and what the legends were. This is culture. This means that you could refer to a place, and the whole thing came back. This is what we think of it in terms of a literate culture. We think of people who know Tolstoy and Flaubert and know know about Homer and Achilles and so forth. But this is culture in the same sense that is. This is an assumed body of history, of experience, of shared experience, of reference, and of response to that reference. That when we talk to each other, we allude to it and we know what we're talking about. It greatly expands our ability to converse with each other. At midsummer before dawn, an orange light returns to the mountains like a great weight. And the small birds cry out and bear it up. Most afternoons of this year, which is written as a number in my own hand on the white plastic labels, I go down the slope where mules I never saw plowed in the sun and died while I was in school. They were beaten to go straight up the hill so that in 3 years the rain had washed all the topsoil out past sea cliffs and frigate birds, only a few years after the forests were gone. Now I go down past a young mango tree to the shelves made of wood poisoned against decay. There, under a roof of palm fronds and chicken wire, I stare at the small native plants in their plastic pots. Here the ohia trees filled with red flowers, red birds, water notes, flying music, the shining of the gods. Here seeds from destroyed valleys open late beside their names in Latin in the shade of leaves I have put there. Well, I always wanted a garden, I realized. And once I'd begun to garden, I always felt deprived without it. When I lived in the country, sometimes I missed the city, and I don't miss the city anymore. I miss friends. I don't see enough of them, but I don't see enough of them when I'm in the city either. But then I realized that when I was in the country, I missed the city sometimes. When I was in the city, I missed the country all the time. I missed the garden all the time. I missed the garden and the wild. I mean, we're 3 miles from the rainforest here, so you can go up into it anytime you want to. I found the land in the late 70s before the real estate prices went way up, and got it very cheaply. My parents had died, and I had half of their life savings. Instead of doing what anybody sensible would have done, I understand, invest it, and get an income from it. I wanted a piece of land, so I put it into land. And then later on, I managed to sell manuscripts, which allowed me to build a house. And so we're lucky of being able to live the way we want to. It certainly wasn't because we had loads of money to start with, or have had loads of money since then. It wasn't a garden. The great thing about it was that you could look out in all directions and watch the owl come over the valley in the evening. But I'm glad that that's not so anymore. I'm glad that my feeling is that I want both. I want a garden and a forest. I want the garden to be the forest. It won't be, but it may make me feel that it is. The palm is in no hurry to be different, and it grows slowly. It knows how to be a palm. When it was a seed, it knew how to be a palm seed. When it was a flower, it knew how to be the flower of a palm. When it was a palm, it grew slowly and without eyes in a salt wind. I should say, before I say anything more, that I'm not a professional botanist. I'm not a particularly skillful gardener. I think I'm a very clumsy gardener, and I'm a totally self-taught botanist, and I forget a lot of things. And I started trying to grow native species from the beginning. That was what I really wanted to do. And the gardening part, I've been learning as I go along from all kinds of people. And one of the things that I learned is that, because you have a few acres, you don't have all of the variety of conditions that are needed to grow a genus. Some things just won't grow in your place, and you learn as you go along by a very painful process of losing things. But I started to grow the palms. All of the Hawaiian palms belong to one genus. They're Pritchardias, named not for anything that the palm ever did, but named for William Pritchard, who was a British governor in Fiji in the early 19th century. There are somewhere between 30 and 40 species of Pritchardia, depending on which botanist you get the figure from. All but about 5 of them are Hawaiian. And the Hawaiian ones are rather different from the non-Hawaiian ones in quite remarkable, quite obvious respects. The seeds are totally different. And there are, if there are 30 some, I suppose we have about 20 species here in the garden now. I would like to grow all of the Prochardias here. There are several other big attempts to grow Prochardias in Hawaii. I mean, Waimea Arboretum on Oahu has a big collection of them. There are real environmental reasons for trying to do that. Their habitats have been severely damaged in most cases, not in all cases, but in many cases. Their numbers have been severely reduced. One species, the Monroei, is down to a single tree in the wild. It's over on Molokai, and we know the tree and keep an eye on it, and we keep trying to get the seeds in time to germinate them, and with the idea of growing them in cultivation and then putting some back into the wild now that the habitat is protected. I mean, the dangers to habitats, apart from human beings and development in the islands now, are all from introductions. They're from cattle, goats, pigs, and rats, all brought in by human beings. And you can protect Prochardia palms from all of those, but it's a job. I mean, you got to fence probably individual trees, and you have to eradicate the rats in some way, which raises the question of is the wild in which we're growing these things really wild, or is this indeed a kind of extended garden that we're turning the wild into a garden? I think to a degree we are. I'm not advocating this. I'm just trying to be realistic about it. And I think that as more and more of the natural world exists only because we decide to spare it in this period of our tenure on Earth where we have control of these things. What we're seeing is that the wilderness is approaching the condition of a garden. I'm at the other end of it. I'm trying to make the garden approach the condition of the wilderness, and neither of these, of course, is going to ever be a pure thing. But it's fascinating to be involved in either of them, and I think it's important to do both of them. You know, there are people who say that you can't save a species by growing it in cultivation, and they're quite right. You can't. And that what you have to do is to preserve the habitat and make sure that it survives in the habitat. I think you have to do both of them. The Prochardia monroei, which is down to one species in the wild, there are 22 trees growing in cultivation. Now, if we can restore that species to its own native habitat, now that the cattle are fenced out and the pigs are fenced out and the goats are fenced out and that the rats are being kept out, it will be through cultivating it, through growing it in cultivation and then putting trees back in, gardening that area of wilderness and then letting it go wild again. One of the reasons I'm not more optimistic than I am is that I think that we're watching a process of pure acceleration, not just acceleration of population or acceleration of destruction of species or acceleration of pollution, but acceleration, pure acceleration. Everything that we're involved in is happening faster. Whether we can actually put a brake on that, I don't know. We talk about migratory birds not evolving fast enough to avoid the Empire State Building, but we're not evolving fast enough. I mean, we evolve awfully fast, and we evolve ideas awfully fast, but our behavior is moving faster than our ability to handle it, and I think this doesn't make for a great deal of hope as to what the outcome is going to be. I think it's important to do things like trying to deal with endangered species and trying to save them. I think it's important to try to do everything you can. But I want it to be an answer to this. I think moral behavior, if one can say that without getting pious and stuffy, is an answer to how should you behave. how could you be? What would be the right way of behaving? A garden, for me, asks the question of if you have a piece of earth, if you have a piece of the earth, what would you want to do with it? How would you want to treat it? I mean, it's okay to say, yes, you shouldn't strip mine Pennsylvania, or you shouldn't you shouldn't tear up the whole of that part of Ecuador for oil. But suppose you do have a piece of land where, for a period of time at least, you can say what happens there. What do you do with it? One of the marvelous things that this garden has been showing me, and it varies, it's not an ecosystem, but there's a lot of variation just in a few acres. It shows me that the earth wants diversity. The more things you put on it, the happier it is. This doesn't mean that any old thing goes, and that you can put any old weed on, and some things brought into Hawaii have been terribly damaging. But diversity is what it wants. It doesn't want monoculture. It doesn't want to grow nothing but wheat or nothing but pineapples. You put a palm from Mexico next to a palm from Malaysia, and generally they get along very well together. And one of the things about Hawaiian things is that if you can restore them, if you can put them back, they get along pretty well, and they get along pretty well with other things. It's the imports that don't get along. It's things like the banana poke, which is the vine strangling large areas of the rainforest, or the monopodial bamboo that came in from South China, which has taken over 4 whole valleys on Maui and destroyed everything. That's not biodiversity. That's a species behaving like Homo sapiens and trying to take over the whole place. There's a part of us that is set out to be the only species, and that's an untenable proposition. Sitting over words very late, I have heard a kind of whispered sigh not far. Like a night wind in pines, or like the sea in the dark. The echo of everything that has ever been spoken. Still spinning its one syllable between the earth and silence. I think one of the things that's happened as a result of the recognition of the crisis of the last decade or so is that people of different disciplines are finding that these mixtures of for example, literary people who care about the natural world, there are more of them than we realized. All of us grew up thinking that we were isolated. That if we cared about the arts and we cared about forests and birds and so forth, we were freaks of the kind. I mean, people cared about one or they cared about the other, but most of our writer friends knew nothing about what they called the outdoors, and tells you something about what the indoors world is like. And a lot the naturalists whom we knew didn't read books unless they had to do with biology. This isn't true. I mean, it's generally true. There always were exceptions, and I think it's becoming more and more. One's seeing more and more people who have both of these sympathies and feel that the relation between them is a very important one, and I think that is going to help in the activist part of it. I mean, the fact that you have someone like Peter Matthiessen who can write Far Tortuga and also be an activist trying to save the snail darter and speaking up for the Lakota Indians on Pine Ridge. I think this is I think one's going to see more of this, and I think it's that's the way it ought to be. I think that when you see it in your own life, as your sympathies and your recognition, your imaginative grasp of the connection between the suffering of someone in Somalia and your own feeling of well-being, the fact that there's a deep connection there. Once you recognize this, you can't go back on it. You can't say, well, I don't think there is any connection. You can't say, well, this is uncomfortable and I'm not going to live by it. I don't think you can retreat from these things without sort of withering up in some way and having some kind of psychological damage, doing some psychological damage to yourself, some kind of suicide. And I think this is probably true of us as a species too, as we begin to realize that these one of the things that's going to happen is that environmentalism will become a cliche. It will be exploited. There will be phony environmentalism. There will be phony green products promulgated by the advertising industry and by distributors, and it will be taken advantage of. But that's not going to kill it in the long run. It'll survive those things. And I think that we're going to be doing more and more of that. And I think that the arts will, because it'll be part of our consciousness. Not that it's a platform or a program. It'll be those things too. But it becomes part of a way of looking at the world that you can't go back from. You know, we haven't made enough progress on racism or on sexism or on any of those things. But we don't look at those things the way we looked at them 50 years ago. I mean, we really don't. And there's no way we can go back to looking at them that way. And I think we're going to see the same kind of thing in relation to the environment. Well, what is hope? You know, when by the time you're 2 years old, you know you're going to die. So you don't have any hope of living forever. On the other hand, you hope to live as fully and as widely and profoundly as possible. You hope to live completely, if you possibly can. And that's what you have to want for everything, isn't it? You want everything to live completely. I think, you know, that there's grave danger of it becoming sentimental if one starts talking about the oneness of all life. But I don't think that there's any alternative to that. I mean, if you think of does the alternative make any sense? That all life is not one? That somehow it is divided up into these compartments that have nothing to do with each other? I mean, that's unthinkable, isn't it? When you find more and more professional scientists coming around to things like the Gaia theory, I think that's ground for hope, because finally our way of seeing it is what we are. I mean, when we really try to see ourselves as a species, we try to define it in terms of language. But what is language? It's a way of articulating our experience of the world, what we see in the full sense of the word. See, not just visual sight, but how the insight into existence. That's what we are, and there is hope for that. There is hope that somehow before we disappear, we may have learned more about who we are. But I think we can't do it by excluding our relation to other kinds of life, other forms of life. They're not different from us. There is a sense in which we are all one. We are all one. On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree. What for? Not for the fruit. The tree that bears the fruit is not the one that was planted. I want the tree that stands in the earth for the first time, with the sun already going down, and the water touching its roots in the earth full of the dead, and the clouds passing one by one over its leaves.